My husband sat across from me at our kitchen table on a Monday morning. He was calm. Completely calm. He said, "Ellison, I need you to be gone by Thursday." Not, "I want a divorce." Not, "We need to talk." Be gone by Thursday. And when he came back to that house on Friday morning, what he found waiting for him was something he will spend the rest of his life trying to forget.
Welcome to Haely Stories. This is the place where you will find real and emotional women's stories that will touch your heart, make you feel seen, and remind you that you are never alone in what you are going through. If that is something you need in your life, then like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that bell icon so you never miss a single story. Now, let me tell you about the Monday morning that ended my marriage and the Friday that ended my husband's carefully made plans.
My name is Ellison, and I am 30 years old. I want to start by telling you what kind of wife I was, because I think it matters. Not to make myself sound perfect, I was not perfect. But I think you need to understand who I was in that marriage before you can understand what happened when it ended. I was the kind of wife who remembered everything, not in a resentful way, in a genuinely invested way. I remembered the names of my husband's colleagues and what their spouses did and what was happening in their lives, because those things mattered to him, and therefore they mattered to me. I remembered the date of every important meeting he had and made sure the morning of that meeting went smoothly. I cooked, I cleaned, I managed the household with the kind of quiet efficiency that goes completely unnoticed until it stops. I also worked. I had a career in interior design that I had built carefully over 6 years. I had my own clients and my own income and my own professional identity that existed entirely separately from my marriage. I was not dependent on my husband financially. That detail becomes important later. His name was Carter. We had been married for 4 years. We lived in a house that I had designed myself. Every room, every detail, right down to the hardware on the kitchen cabinets. I had poured myself into that house the way some people pour themselves into their children. It was the most beautiful space I had ever created, and I lived in it every day and loved it. I thought Carter loved it too. I thought Carter loved me too. I was wrong about both things, and I found that out on a Monday morning at our kitchen table. I had noticed things changing in the months before that Monday. Carter had become distant, in the particular way that people become distant when they are somewhere else in their mind. Present in the room, but not present in the conversation. Answering questions with the minimum number of words. Coming home later than usual without explanation. I had tried to talk to him about it. Twice. Both times he had said he was stressed at work, and I had believed him because I wanted to believe him, and because the alternative was something I was not ready to look at directly. I was making breakfast on that Monday morning when Carter came into the kitchen. He was dressed for work. He poured himself a coffee. He sat down at the table. He said, "Ellison, I need to talk to you about something." I turned around from the stove. I looked at his face, and I knew, in the way you know things before they are said, that whatever came next was going to be the kind of thing you cannot unknow. He said, "I need you to be gone by Thursday." I said, "I am sorry?" He said it again. He said he needed me out of the house by Thursday evening. He said he had been thinking about it for a long time and he had made his decision. And he thought it was better to be clear about the timeline so I could make arrangements. I stood at the stove holding a spatula and I looked at my husband and I said, "Carter, we are married. You cannot give me a Thursday deadline to leave our home." He said,
"The house is in my name, Ellison." And there it was. The house was in Carter's name. That is the thing I have to explain, because it is the thing I am most ashamed of. Not because it makes me stupid, but because it shows how completely I had trusted someone who did not deserve it. When we bought the house 4 years earlier, Carter had handled everything. The mortgage application, the legal paperwork, all of it. He had said it was simpler to do it in one name for tax reasons, and I had believed him because he worked in finance and I did not, and it had seemed like a reasonable thing at the time. I understand now what it actually was. It was a plan. Not for our marriage. For the end of it. I found out later, much later, that Carter had been involved with someone else for 8 months before that Monday morning. A woman from his office. Someone he had clearly decided was his future, while I was designing his kitchen cabinets and cooking his breakfast and building a life around someone who had already mentally moved on. But I did not know any of that on Monday morning. On Monday morning, all I knew was that my husband had given me 3 days to leave my home. I put the spatula down on the counter very carefully. I said, "I will need more than 3 days, Carter."
He said, "Thursday, Ellison. I have been clear." Then he picked up his coffee and he left for work. I stood in my kitchen, the kitchen I had designed, in my house, the house I had filled with everything I knew about beauty and comfort and home. And I stood there for a long time after the front door closed. And then I sat down and I started making phone calls. The first call I made was to my best friend, Rachel. Rachel is the kind of person you call when everything has collapsed, because she is the kind of person who does not panic and does not offer useless comfort and does not ask questions that do not matter. She listens, and then she asks the right questions, and then she helps you figure out what to do next. I told her everything. The Monday morning, the Thursday deadline, the house being in Carter's name. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Okay, first things first. Call a lawyer today. Not tomorrow, today." I called a lawyer that morning. Her name was Patricia Hayle, and she had been recommended to me by a colleague 2 years earlier in a completely different context, and I had saved her number without knowing why. I understood why now. I told her my situation. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Do you have documentation of your financial contributions to the household over the past 4 years?" I said I had everything. Bank statements, tax returns, records of every payment I had made toward household expenses, groceries, utilities, renovations I had funded myself. I had kept records of everything. Not because I had expected this, but because I was organized in the way that people who run their own businesses have to be organized. She said, "Good. Do not leave that house voluntarily before Thursday, and do not touch anything." I said, "What do you mean, do not touch anything?" She said, "I mean exactly that. Leave everything exactly as it is. I will explain why later." I trusted her. I did not fully understand yet, but I trusted her. I spent Tuesday and Wednesday doing 2 things simultaneously. The first thing was gathering every document Patricia had asked for. Bank statements going back 4 years, records of the renovation work I had funded, receipts for furniture and fixtures I had purchased, photographs I had taken of every room at every stage of the design process. Photographs I had taken because I was proud of what I had created and wanted to document it. Photographs that now served a completely different purpose. The second thing was something Patricia had suggested, and that I had initially resisted,
and then understood completely.
She told me to document the house, every room, every detail, every item. She told me to make a comprehensive record of everything inside that house, what it was worth, and what I had contributed to it. I spent 2 evenings doing exactly that, walking through every room with my phone, methodical and thorough, the way I had been trained to be thorough as a designer. I knew that house better than anyone. I had chosen everything in it. I knew what every piece had cost and where it had come from and who had paid for it. Carter came home both evenings and barely looked at me. He ate dinner, which I did not cook, and went to his study and closed the door. He was behaving like a man who believed Thursday was a formality, a confirmation of something already decided, a date he was simply waiting to arrive. He had no idea what I had been doing while he waited. Thursday came. Carter left for work at his usual time. He said nothing to me at breakfast. He did not ask if I had packed. He did not check whether I was preparing to leave. He simply left, with the confidence of a man who believes the difficult part is already handled. I was still there when he left. I was still there all day. I sat in my living room, in my house, surrounded by the life I had built, and I waited. Patricia had filed papers the day before. Not divorce papers yet, though those would come. What she had filed was documentation of my financial contribution to the marital home over 4 years. Documentation of the renovation work I had personally funded, which amounted to a significant portion of the home's current value. Documentation that established that the house, regardless of whose name was on the mortgage, had been built into what it was through my work and my money and my professional expertise. She had also sent Carter's lawyer a letter that morning. Carter did not come home Thursday evening. He sent a text at 7 p.m. that said, "Ellison, I expected you to be gone. We agreed." I replied, "I did not agree to anything, Carter. I will speak to you through my lawyer." There was a long pause before his next message arrived. It said, "What lawyer?" Carter came home Friday morning. I heard his car in the driveway at just after 9. I was in the kitchen, drinking coffee. I had slept in our bed. I had made myself breakfast in our kitchen. I had lived in our house exactly as I had lived in it every day for 4 years. He came through the front door. And he stopped when he saw me sitting at the kitchen table. He said, "Ellison, what are you doing here?" I said, "I live here, Carter." He said, "We had an agreement." I said, "We did not have an agreement. You gave me a deadline. Those are different things." He started to say something about the house being in his name, and I let him finish. And then I slid a folder across the kitchen table toward him. He looked at it without picking it up. I said, "That is a summary of my financial and professional contributions to this home over the past 4 years. The renovation of the kitchen, which I designed and funded. The renovation of the master bathroom. The landscaping I commissioned and paid for. The furniture and fixtures throughout the house that I purchased personally. My lawyer has the full documentation." He picked up the folder. I watched his face as he read. The confidence he had walked in with, that particular settled certainty of a man whose plan is proceeding as expected, began to change. Not dramatically, but visibly. Something behind his eyes recalculated. He said, "This does not change the legal ownership of the property." I said, "No, but it changes the conversation about what happens to the value of that property.
My lawyer is very clear about that. There was something else Carter did not know about when he walked through that door on Friday morning. What he found waiting for him was something he will spend the rest of his life trying to forget. He said, "This does not change the legal ownership of the property." I said, "No, but it changes the conversation about what happens to the value of that property." My lawyer is very clear about that. There was something else Carter did not know about when he walked through that door on Friday morning. What he found waiting for him was something he will spend the rest of his life trying to forget.
He did not know that I had spent the previous 6 weeks, during the period when I had sensed something was wrong but had not yet known what, quietly transferring my design business assets into a separate structure that was entirely mine. Not because I had known this was coming, but because Rachel had suggested 18 months earlier, after her own difficult divorce, that every woman with her own business should have it structured in a way that is clearly and legally hers alone. I had done it because Rachel was usually right about things, and because it had seemed sensible.
Carter had assumed that my business income, my client relationships, my professional reputation would all somehow factor into a settlement in his favor. He had made calculations based on what he thought he knew about our financial situation. His calculations were wrong. He also did not know about a conversation I had with my father-in-law the previous week. Carter's father, a man named Gerald, who had always been quietly kind to me, had called me unexpectedly on Wednesday. He had heard, through whatever channels family members hear things, that Carter was ending the marriage. He had said he was sorry. He had said he thought Carter was making a mistake. And then he had said something that I had not expected. He had said that the property Carter claimed was entirely his had been partially funded by a gift from Gerald himself at the time of purchase, a gift that had been given to both of us as a couple. He said he had documentation of that and would be willing to provide it if it was relevant. I had given Patricia that information the same day. The next several weeks were not easy. I will not pretend they were. Divorce is never easy, regardless of who is at fault or who saw it coming or how prepared you think you are. There are practical things and emotional things, and they arrive mixed together without any concern for your ability to handle both simultaneously. But Carter's nightmare, the one he came home to on Friday morning, was not a single moment. It was a series of realizations that arrived one after another over those weeks. The realization that the house could not simply be handed over to him without accounting for my contributions. The realization that his assumptions about my business and my finances had been wrong. The realization that his own father had provided a statement that complicated his legal position significantly.
And then the realization that the woman from his office, the one he had clearly planned his Thursday deadline around, had found out about all of it. Had found out that the clean and simple transition Carter had promised her was neither clean nor simple. Had found out that there was a wife who was not going quietly, and a lawyer who was thorough, and a father-in-law who had chosen honesty over family loyalty. I do not know exactly what happened between Carter and that woman. I know that she stopped appearing in the context of the divorce proceedings after the first month. I know that Carter's lawyer sent mine a message suggesting Carter was open to a more collaborative settlement conversation. I know that Carter himself called me once, late on a Tuesday evening, and started to say something and then stopped, and said, "I handled this badly, Ellison." I said, "Yes, Carter, you did." He said, "I did not think you would fight." I said, "I know you did not." The settlement took 4 months to finalize. I will not give you every detail because some of it is private and some of it is still something I am processing. What I will tell you is that I did not leave that house empty-handed. Not even close. My contributions to the property were recognized. The value I had added through my professional work and my personal funding was calculated and accounted for. Gerald's documentation of his original gift was included in the proceedings. Carter's position, which had started from a place of complete certainty, ended from a place of significant compromise.
I did not keep the house. I did not want to keep the house. I had loved that house completely and genuinely, and I did not want to live in it alone with the knowledge of what had been planned inside it. I wanted the value of what I had put into it, and I got that. I found an apartment the month after the settlement, smaller than the house, just mine. The first night I slept there, I slept better than I had in months. I sat in my empty apartment, surrounded by boxes, and I felt something I had not expected to feel so soon. I felt free. I am 30 years old, and my marriage ended because my husband gave me a Thursday deadline to leave my own home. He thought he knew exactly how that story ended. He was wrong. I have learned things through this experience that I could not have learned any other way. I have learned that the details matter, that knowing what is in your own name and what is not, what you own and what you have contributed to, what your financial situation actually is rather than what you assume it to be, these things are not pessimistic. They are essential. I have learned that being organized and thorough and careful, qualities that had been so much a part of who I was that I barely noticed them, were exactly the things that protected me when I needed protecting. I have learned that trust is not the same as blindness, that loving someone does not mean abandoning your own clarity about your own life. And I have learned something about myself that I think is the most important thing. I did not fall apart. I wanted to. On that Monday morning when Carter picked up his coffee and walked out the door, I felt the pull of it, the overwhelming desire to simply collapse under the weight of what had just happened. But I did not. I put the spatula down carefully. I sat down, and I started making phone calls. Because that is who I am, not someone who crumbles under pressure. Someone who, when the ground disappears beneath her, finds out very quickly exactly where her feet are. My name is Ellison. I am 30 years old. My husband told me to be gone by Thursday. I was still there on Friday. And that is my story. He thought he had planned everything perfectly. He thought Thursday was the end of my story. He forgot that I was the one who had built everything around him, and I had no intention of leaving it behind. Thank you for listening. This is Haely Stories. We will see you in the next one.